Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of An Evening With, courtesy of the Harlequins Foundation. My name is James Swanson, and I work both for the club and the Harlequins Foundation. So tonight, to mark the end of LGBT History Month, we're celebrating the release of Steelers, a documentary about the world's first gay rugby club, the King's Cross Steelers. Delighted to be joined by Eammon Ashton-Atkinson, the film's director, and we have Nic Evans, who is the former director of rugby for the club, and lastly, Drew McDowell, who is a central character from the film. So for tonight's discussion, it's going to last around 60 minutes or so, with the final 15 minutes left for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll look to answer those at the end. So just to kick us off, I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, tell us where they're based today, and just sort of briefly say how the last 12 months have been. So we'll kick off. Eammon, do you want to start for us?
Sure. Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm super excited. So I'm calling from DC. I've been in America for the past 18 months, and DC covering the US election, so it's been pretty crazy. And yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of a year, and actually this documentary has been like the one positive thing that has really been getting me through lockdown and sort of something positive to look forward to. So I'm really happy that it's finally out there in the UK and people are seeing it.
Tremendous. Nic?
Hi, I'm Nic Evans, and I am literally just a few miles down the road from the Stoop in southwest London, and I lecture at St Mary's University in Twickenham on the PE degree and a bit of sports coaching, and yeah, that's me right now.
Great. And lastly, Drew.
Hi, I'm Drew McDowell. I'm actually also in London, not too far from Elephant and Castle. I work for Legal and General Capital, heading up the risk team, so in financial kind of insurance industry.
Tremendous. So again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I was very fortunate to be able to watch the film on Friday evening. Tremendous piece of work, tremendous storytelling. So it's a great privilege to have you all on the call tonight. The first question which I want to pose to you all is mental health is a very key topic of discussion in the documentary. And I'd like to ask you all, actually, if you can tell us more about the role that sport plays in mental health, and in particular the challenges the last 12 months has presented without sport being able to be played. So Eammon, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Look, you know, if you've seen the film, you'll know my story and the struggles I faced growing up with mental health, and you know, having had 2 bouts of depression. And obviously Simon, one of the other main characters who couldn't be here today, his story focuses on mental health. So when I went about sort of planning this documentary, I rocked up to Amsterdam with my camera, with the lens I hired, and I didn't have anyone sort of lined up to talk. So I didn't really know Nic or Drew would be participating. And then Simon was the first person I wanted in the film because he and I had spoken about similar mental health stories. The fact we were both on antidepressants at some point. So I knew I really wanted his story in, and he was a bit hesitant at first when we began filming because it's a very personal story. But you know, I kept gently pushing, and eventually he said yes, he'll be involved, and he said that if he was going to do it, he would talk honestly, and I think that really comes across in the film. You know, he was quite brave, I think, to speak, and has been like a bit, you know, not worried, but like feeling vulnerable in it, and you know, he's putting himself out there. So he's gotten a few messages this weekend, which have really from people who saw the film and said how much his storyline helped them. So, you know, to me, sport was a huge factor in making me kind of recover, and I haven't had depression since. And I think like having that experience with the Steelers really kind of set me up for where I am now.
Great, no, thank you. Drew, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I guess the documentary didn't cover, you know, that part of my story as much, but weirdly enough, that tournament, I was probably at one of my lower points with my mental health. And I can distinctly remember having to get ready and get psyched for the very first game where we were playing against Australia, and I knew it was a significantly tough competitor. And then I kind of got a anxiety attack right just before the game started, and had to go to Nic, and she saw me kind of basically in a bit of a state, and we walked around the practice pitch for, you know, a good 5 minutes, and kind of just visualizing the game and what contribution I would make, and, you know, basically trying to reinvigorate the fact that, you know, I could play rugby. I think I've always used sport as my way to escape any mental health issues, and I think that during that period was a weird time where actually my confidence was very much hampered, because I didn't think I was a good enough player, or as good enough player as I used to be. So, you know, very much, I think for sport has been always my escapism and way of dealing with things, and it still is to this day. It's kind of a way that I can just essentially, just kind of manage what's going on in my head, and use it as a bit of a meditation of sorts.
Yeah, no, exactly. Sport plays that role for so many. Nic, what about yourself? What are your thoughts on sort of the role that sport plays?
Yeah, well, I guess for me, thinking about it as a coach's perspective, I've always tried to pride myself on trying to make really good connections and relationships within the team. And you're not going to get that with everybody that you coach. But I always try to think of myself very much in terms of I've got a bigger job than the tech tack and that kind of stuff. And my role is also there to kind of facilitate and support. And I think that what has been brilliant about this lockdown is that people have really started to realize that holistic coaching is really important. Taking care of human beings is really important. And actually, what we're really all missing is social connection. And when we have social connection, like Steelers, like twice a week training and having a laugh and working towards a goal every single weekend, there's something really mentally healthy about that. And I think mental ill health for me is when you have disconnection. So it's actually just opportunities to have connection. And I think that's what's really special about Steelers, is that there's so many men having an opportunity for a really deep social connection.
Yeah, and I think that's very much a key word, and it comes up very strongly through the film, the social connection that all players have and the relationship that you have with them as well, Nic. I guess the sort of the next question which I wanted to ask is, upon seeing the film, have you learned anything new about yourself that you sort of weren't aware of before? Drew, I'll start with you.
About the film specifically, or just generally?
You can touch on both if you want to.
Yeah, I guess since the film was taped and then subsequently aired, and going through the rounds of festivals, I think for me personally, I've had my own kind of personal growth in just, I think, kind of a lot of my mental health issues and things that I was going through, but also moving away from the club for a year and living in Colorado was kind of a good step away from what I grew to, you know, the life I grew in London and with the Steelers and everything. So it actually made me kind of reflect on a lot of those relationships I had formed, the team, the club, my life in London, and it's kind of the reason why I've moved back was because of those strong connections, and very much feels like home, even though the States is, you know, technically home, but, you know, I've grown my life here. So, you know, I think I haven't really thought much of the documentary because I kind of see it as Eammon's, and, you know, I play a very small part in it, which I'm very glad about. But if anything, I'm actually more excited for the attention it's been getting and what it's doing for the club as a whole.
Okay, great. Thank you. Nic, how about yourself? Did you learn anything new about yourself, maybe your coaching style or anything that was sort of featured in the film?
Well, I learned I really shouldn't swear because it always bites you. My mum wasn't impressed with that. But I guess for me, it just highlights how much of an important time for me Steelers was, and I was really emotional through the film because it was literally my last weekend with the boys, and there's just that sense of loss really for me because it's come to the end of the 3 years, and I think that we as a club had got to a really good, healthy place, and I wanted to challenge myself by working in a more elite environment and seeing if I could push myself in that, because I think what is beautiful about the club is that it's a community club, and I think there's a real importance in that. And I think that you can't devalue that. It's just that for me, I wanted to see if I could push myself in a different pathway, if that makes sense. But I noticed how much I cried, and I think the amount I cried is probably just because of the love affair, I suppose, I have with the club and the friendships that I genuinely miss on a kind of 3 times a week basis, and I'm really lucky that I still have people in my life that are connected to me, and I still see. But yeah, I guess it was a sense of grief, sense of loss, really, I suppose.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, ultimately, your passion came across strongest in that film. Lastly, sort of, Eammon, did you learn anything new about yourself watching it back? I mean, granted, I know you did, obviously, as from a directing standpoint and an editing standpoint, I know you've probably seen all the stills of this film. Yes. But was there anything watching back that you learned about yourself?
I think, for me, it was a personal challenge. So I didn't know if I could pull something like this off. So I work as a news reporter and a cameraman. So I'm used to doing like 1 minute 30 stories that go in the evening news. So I wanted to see if I could pull off a long format story. And, I looked back at my message that I sent Nic ahead of the competition. And then I was like, Nic, can I come down? I'm thinking of shooting a mini documentary. And I thought maybe it might be a 20-minute thing that ends up on YouTube. And just when it started, really the success of the film is down to the club, the team, and the 3 wonderful characters. We only did 1 hour interviews with each of them. We didn't go back and reshoot anything. And say Nic was the first person I interviewed, and the honesty and the warmth and the heart she spoke with, I was crying doing the interview with you, remember? And I was like, wow, I've got something really special here. And then, Drew's bit is Nic suggested that I should pick Drew. And it just so happened to had all that wonderful material of you doing the splits and your drag show. Drew sort of had this really intelligent kind of response about all the identity and masculinity. And then obviously Simon's story, which I relate to so much because I've suffered, mental health struggles as well. He just spoke, you can see he's working it out as he's talking. So, all these things needed to come together for the film to be what it is. And I'm just, a lot of it is luck. And I guess I'm just very proud of the end result. And I've had my husband, John, who was critical when I was editing it, giving lots of feedback about what was working and what wasn't.
No, tremendous. It's really interesting to hear how all of those stories developed and how you decided to sort of focus on different elements. So really useful to hear that. Thank you. And again, I think the key piece there is how authentic it came across all of those different sort of stories. Another thing that struck me, which is again very much emphasized and considered on the documentary, is the relationship between masculinity and sport, which is sort of deeply explored. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between sport and masculinity, and maybe some of the challenges it can present? And I think, Drew, I think a great place to start from your perspective.
Yeah, I guess, being an American, there's very much a strong expectation or view and perception of men playing sport and the way that you have to act and come across. And I very much, throughout my life had to prove my athleticism because of my nature was more considered effeminate or flamboyant. So it meant that I had to work a little bit harder to prove actually that I was a formidable athlete to my counterparts, to my peers, to kind of the other sportsmen that I played with. So, and you kind of feel, playing in those environments, feel like a bit of an outsider because you can't relate to those other men and the stories or the banter or just general jokes and the way that they interact with each other, especially when you're not out and you're struggling with your own kind of internal, what we probably would consider at that time internal demons, but actually it was just trying to figure out who you were as a person. And I think because of that, you didn't really want to stray too far because, there's that nature in the locker rooms or before games or celebrating wins and where it could come across very homosexual in nature in the way that they kind of interacted with each other. And stepping into that arena, you kind of questioned yourself, oh, am I doing this for one reason, or actually are they going to figure me out, or anything of that nature? So kind of the, relief of playing with the Steelers was that you didn't really have to worry about that. You could kind of just focus on your game and how you played, and once you were on the pitch, what those 80 minutes consisted of, and then when you were off the pitch, be whoever you wanted to be. And I think that's kind of what the environment and space that we try and provide people that come to our club, not wanting to feel like they need to assimilate to a certain masculine definition that society has, kind of developed over years.
No, incredibly valid. And I think something which struck me as sort of queer people, we self-edit, we self-regulate in certain situations. And as you said, ultimately, you can't describe the feeling of not really having to do that anymore and being in a space where that's no longer questioned. So it's very, very important. Eammon, would you like to sort of step into to discuss this sort of the role between the two?
Yeah, look, echoing what Drew said, but for me, what has been really encouraging about this film is like how much it seems there is at the highest levels of rugby a desire for that to change. I did a session with the RFU where you had the senior levels of management, including the president of the RFU, on this call, genuinely asking how can we try and change this in community grassroots rugby. So I think it is a situation where we are definitely on that path to where we want to be. And the All Blacks tweeted the trailer, England Rugby tweeted the trailer to this film. Can you imagine that happening 15, 20 years ago? There's no way in hell. So all these little things are so important to changing that perception, where I think at the end of the day, you can walk in as a gay man into a rugby club and it not be an issue. I don't think we're there at the moment, because as Drew says, I would still have to ask those questions. Hey, if they see the ring on my finger and ask me about my missus, do I correct them and say, oh, he's doing great? So.
Yeah, no, definitely. Nic, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this also.
Yeah, I think, I guess I've always seen it from the other end of the scale, in that I've always been really criticised for being too masculine and why am I playing masculine sports, etc. And I've seen that move and shift quite significantly from when I first started playing a masculine sport to now. What really infuriated me personally, and I got really fierce and protective about it, was when we went to Nashville 2 years prior. Members of the gay community actually criticised Drew for being in a pair of cowboy boots, white hot pants, with a fan, looking absolutely fabulous. And it was something about, a real questioning of what is your identity, and your identity could be multiple things. It can, you can be masculine to feminine, from game, off game, what you wear in the evening. It can be really fluid. And I got into a really, a keyboard warrior moment where I was like, well, actually, I'm his coach and he's absolutely brilliant and he's really fierce on the pitch. And, you know, if he wants to wear a pair of white hot pants, he can crack on as far as I'm concerned, you know. So I think it's not just, Drew's laughing at me now because I got mad. But you know, sometimes we get that criticism off each other as well. And I think, you know, it's about being a club that is truly inclusive of however you choose to identify, and also how you choose to express yourself, really.
Because I wonder, like, sometimes whether, you know, it's gay people with, like, sometimes it's like internalized homophobia, you know, when that sort of stuff comes out, like, it's, you know, oh, we're playing this really masculine game, you know, we're just like you, whereas you can be like that, you can, you know, be wearing a cowboy boot and a, yeah.
I think there's also the aspect that, you know, earlier generations or older generations, depending on how you want to see it, their struggles coming out and trying to have the heterosexual world view the LGBTQ plus community in a way that was relatable and on the same level plane. And it meant that if we then fit into a certain stereotype that was preconceived or seen or created, then that almost undoes all the hard work that they kind of built up to. So it's in a way of, like, you know, total line, so that way we can continue fighting on to the next day. Whereas, you know, I think for a lot of us, it's actually, no, let's flip the script and change the narrative. I get to be who I want to be, and that doesn't mean it's going to have an impact on who I am on the pitch and how I play and my ability. You know, it's not equal and in that view. And very much, I think you can still fight the good fight in LGBTQ and still enjoy being an athlete.
And I think that does that really well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think that is something Steelers does.
And, you know, like the Harlequins holding the pride game, I mean, that's just like the good that does. You know, you just can't even overstate how, you know, how it brings up these conversations, because I'm sure there would have been a lot of people who are like, well, why are they having a pride game, or, you know, cracking jokes about it or whatever, but, you know, it kind of forces those conversations to be had.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think the key word here is visibility. I think that what will happen with the Harlequins Pride game, and making sure that we interweaved various IGR clubs into the delivery of the day to sort of tell the, you know, the audience, you know, these clubs exist. They you know, they play a fantastic role, and there's a space for everyone. But again, the fact that the rugby family is so diverse in what it does, and I think that's when I was watching the film that I saw it was so effective that you interweave those different narratives to showcase, again, by diversity within an inclusive club, different identities, different way people present themselves, you know, the role that Drew plays, you know, it's a fantastic demonstration of the richness of a tapestry, I guess is the word, across Steelers, but also the community as a whole.
So my dad calls it like a love letter to the sport of rugby, you know, and like, I think, like, I've been reflecting, like, what makes rugby so special for me is that it's like a sport where you're going into battle with your mates. You're literally putting your body on the line. And on a Saturday, once you've had that 80 minutes of essentially going to war, you know, you can have that drink and you've got this amazing camaraderie, this amazing relationship with someone at the pub that you know, like talking about, hey, how we like got in that ruck and pushed that person over and scored the try. Like, it's just something you can't get from a lot of other situations, let alone other sports. So I think the fact that there are now like 80 gay teams across the world, you know, you don't see that in other sports. You know, I think there is something special about rugby that sort of has this, this impact.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, the fact that now is where we're at, and again, there's so much more work to be done, but the fact that exists, and you mentioned this earlier in regards to England Rugby retweeting the trailer, New Zealand, is, you know, the role that IGR plays, and particularly, you know, the role that the King's Cross Steelers have played of driving the narrative, making sure that visibility is there. and I guess also presenting themselves so well so that people, you know, are able to understand and be along for that journey, is a key piece as well. And again, this film is only the next step, this next stage of that, to continue that conversation. A question I wanted to pose to you, which I was thinking about when I was watching the film, is you all grew up in different parts of the world. Eammon in Australia, Drew in the States, Nic in Wales. And it's sort of something I wanted to touch on, because you all connected at the Steelers in London. And I guess the question I wanted to ask is, how do you compare those sports environments and the ones where, in regards to inclusive rugby and sport, comparing it to sort of where you grew up and, you know, what it's like in London? I mean, are there any differences? Nic, do you want to start us off?
Well, I think it is very different, the Welsh Valleys compared to English rugby generally. We're very much a community sport. It's played by everybody. It's still a working class sport in Wales. So your whole social life is based around that. My grandfather was the treasurer of my rugby club, and he played fullback. My dad played 12 for him. And they didn't actually have a girls team when I was growing up. So I had to go down to Cardiff to play rugby, but it felt like, for me, a rite of passage. And if I hadn't played rugby, I probably wouldn't have felt fully Welsh, I suppose. So, you know, and it's a case of, when you're Welsh, all you can think about is wanting to play for your own country. You know, you saw George North yesterday nearly in tears about his 100th cap. And I just think that, so it's a community space back home. And it is where you grow up, you know, is where you spend your Saturdays watching your dad, etc. And then as I grew up, as I became a teenager, then my grandfather got me season ticket to Cardiff Blues and a shirt by the time I'm 11. So I guess you're brought up with it, and there is interwoven into it all parts of your lives, really. So what I love about Steelers maybe is the fact that, you know, you talk about this patchwork quilt. I think it's the intersectionality of Steelers. You bring people from every part of the globe, because everybody wants to come and work in London. So you get this real rich experience of cultural diversity there, really. So I think that's what's lovely.
Yeah, great, thank you. Drew, how about yourself? From growing up in the US, I'm not sure if you played rugby there before you came over to the UK. What differences are there?
Yeah, so I think, you know, most people know, or probably aware, that, you know, rugby isn't a prominent sport in the States, and it's really down to the fact that high schools and younger ages, it's considered too costly from an insurance perspective. So, you know, the sport's not really introduced to you until, one, if the high school has sufficient money to kind of support it, or two, you kind of, like I did, failed in my soccer, football tryouts and decided to move over to rugby and play in university. So, you know, it's also a different culture, in the sense that it's, I don't know, it's very stereotypical, as you see on certain sports films, and how everyone kind of G's each other up and gets all very hyped. And moving over to the UK, because I knew, you know, rugby was born in the UK very much, I remember kind of messaging the recruitment officer of the Steelers, telling them, basically listing out my accomplishments in my CV, because I was like, oh, I don't know if they'll accept me into the club, because, you know, they've been playing for so long, so on and so forth. And then, of course, when I come to go watch them, and then the coach at the time, Iggy, was like, oh, we're short a player, can you play? And I was like, I wasn't really prepared, given the fact I had a Christmas party the night before and completely hungover. So that's beside the point. But, you know, it was very welcoming from day one. And also, you know, we don't have the funds in the States to have our own dedicated clubhouse and coaching. So it's a different way of nurturing and developing the sport overall. Whereas, you know, here there's just so much support across the board, and great coaches and great talent. And, you know, very much Nic is one of those people. So, yeah, I think it's a faster paced game, and my just general gameplay changed as a result of moving over here.
Great, thank you. Eammon, I guess I'll ask you as well. And again, the film started this way of touching on your childhood, which was, I think, a very effective way of starting the documentary off. What differences do you recognise between the culture in Australia and maybe how things are in London?
It's a really hard question to answer because, I love my home country, but, I do think, if I'm being honest, that it is a few years behind where it needs to be. We only just had gay marriage legalised. And I still think, like, this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation. I tried really hard when the film played in Australia to get any kind of tweeting or support from Australia Rugby, and I got no replies to any messages or emails. Whereas it's been the opposite in England Rugby. I'm having calls. The Chief Executive Officer and Chief Operating Officer are texting me, asking for updates. So I think Australia, it's the country where the stereotype is it's masculine boys in speedos hanging out down at the beach, and in some respects, like, there is that masculine culture there, and I think it's, when I moved to London, it never occurred to me that, like, I could get married and have a family and a husband. I just never assumed that would happen to me, because that's not something that happens in Australia. Gay men aren't married there up until 2 years ago. And so when I moved there and I joined the Steelers, and there were people who had husbands and families, and it was really eye-opening to me, and it took me by surprise. It was almost shocking. I was like, oh wow, like, that is an option. And I met my husband John in the club, so I think Australia has like a few 3 or 4 gay rugby clubs, but I wonder what it would be like playing in those clubs compared with the Steelers, which is just a wonderful big family.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. So the next question I wanted to ask, and Nic is going to go to you first, but I'd love to hear Drew and Eammon's perspective as well. Nic, what are the advantages of a woman coaching a men's rugby team?
I'm not sure if there's an advantage to it at all. I think I've never thought about it, I suppose, in terms of an advantage. I just think it's just different. We're just different human beings, and I think we just bring different things to the game. Really, I think it's a bit of a novelty factor when you go to other clubs. Well, I actually had a Welshman turn up for training one night, and he said, "So who are you then?" And he was really Valleys accent, and I said, "Well, I'm the DOR." He went, "Well, that wouldn't happen with us up in the Valleys, would it? We wouldn't get this opportunity." So even from the Valleys to London, things change really. I don't know. I guess maybe some players are willing to be a bit more vulnerable with me and tell me how they feel about things, maybe, because but I don't know if that's just my personality, in that for some people they see me as more approachable. I'm not really sure. I think for me it's just an obsession about rugby, I suppose, and just watching it from the bigger picture, trying to analyze everything that's happening in the game, and just trying to make players who have a better understanding of the game so that they can solve their own problems on the pitch. I think that's just the big one for me. And the other big one for me is just about playing the game with the potential of the players you have on the pitch. So the game looks completely different depending on who you have on the pitch, and I think that is one of my, driving forces, is just trying to get everybody's potential. And I don't succeed at that. Maybe I'm a bit like Marmite. Maybe you love me, you hate me, but yeah, I suppose that's what you get if you get me, really, I suppose.
Well, I fall into the love you category. So from the film's perspective, Nic was a bit of an accident. I sat next to her after that first training session you see in the film, just on the bus. I knew Nic from the club. I wasn't super close with Nic at that stage, and I just asked her, oh, so how did you get into rugby anyway? And she told me her granddad's story. And I was like, ding, you're the perfect person for this film. And it's been an interesting journey, because when I joined the club and someone pointed out that Nic was the head coach, I have to admit, I had that thought in my mind, like, who is this woman and what would she know to teach me a thing or two about rugby? And I'm ashamed that that was the thought I had. And, you know, when you meet her and she coaches you, by the end, I was like, you know, she's one of the best coaches I've ever had, telling me things no one had told me, explaining things in such a simple way, and being kind and caring in a way that I'd never had before. And with the film, I had some feedback from a producer who said, we need to establish who Nic is and why she's the coach at the start. So put some of the bits you've had at the end at the beginning of the story. And I reflected a lot about that, because this is quite an experienced, well-known producer. And then in the end, I decided to ignore that advice, because I like that perhaps you might have that same prejudice that I first had when I joined the club. When you see the movie, like, who is this person? Because it's unexpected, perhaps. And then by the end of the film, you're like, wow, she is the most incredible person, the most incredible coach, the heart of the film and the heart of the rugby club. And so, you know, I think, Nic, in my mind, like, your story is such an important part of the film, and I don't think it would be, you know, as great if you weren't in it. So yeah.
No, you were there. You were in the film. You were there witnessing those pep talks. Talk to us about Nic's role as a coach.
Yeah, so I'm a bit biased, because I have very strong, willful, powerful females in my life, just generally growing up. So I tend to kind of push more. I get closer to those archetypes, if you will, and very much females in that position. And Nic is very much that for me, and for, you know, she's a formidable coach. And I think one of the things that, you know, as much as she would fight my corner, as kind of she explained, I had to fight her corner as well, because we, you know, although we are predominantly a gay and kind of bisexual team, inclusive team, you know, there's still those similar prejudices that Eammon had, and I very much had to explain to those certain individuals within my own team and kind of make them realize actually what their prejudices were as and when they had it, because they wouldn't give, you know, a male coach the same kind of bullshit or talk back in the same manner. I think there's, you know, one of her biggest advantages, and I don't know if this is a case, you know, for all female coaches, but very much was true for Nic, is there's just a higher level of EQ, where not all male coaches would generally have, because there's that expectation is just, you're a man, so just get on with it. Just, if you're hurt, whatever, kind of move on and deal with it. Whereas, you know, Nic very much would step in, be that force of nature that she needed to be, but at the same respect, make sure that you were actually supported, and not just physically, but emotionally as well. And I don't know if you would, you know, like I said, get that with male coaches all the time. And I think, you know, she had a stronger relation to us and affinity, because, you know, as a female in a predominantly male world, as a coach, and very much getting the crap that she did while she was our coach, and being considered an assistant coach or the water lady or someone to get the coffee, whatever it might be, all those awful stereotypes, you know, she was dealing with the same struggles that we were dealing with, of having to prove ourselves on the pitch and actually our ability to do the job that we were there to do. So, you know, I think that's for a lot of us, you know, who are strong and have a strong friendship and relationship with her, kind of saw that and understood that and gravitated to her because of that.
Do you remember, Nic, the first time you watched the film with me? So we did like a special screening in London, and so I just showed it first to Nic, Simon, and Drew, and Matt, the club chairman, in a private screening room. And do you remember, you were like, oh, when the bits where you were shouting at the team and stuff? But, you know, it's like some of my favorite parts of the film, and everyone's like, yes, give it to the Nic.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite parts as well. And I guess to pick up what you said, Nic, about sort of maybe players in the team with that love-hate relationship. It sounds as though you've got two people here that both love you, and it comes across very strongly across in this conversation, but across the team, I'm sure, as well.
I just think that, like, my part in the club, I said it when I left. I had a leaving speech which went on for ages because I had so much to say, but I just felt like I was a tiny cog. There's a humongous amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. My assistant coach was really highly organised, and you know, all our paperwork for matches, everything was always done. You know, we worked as a real team. There was this really wonderful problem where Eden was developing pathway players, and was the club actually going to be able to fit that many players in? So we went from this small club of, you know, 50 or 70, and within 3 years we had 150 players, and we were in level 7, we were in level 9 or level 10 with the twos, and we had a 3rd team in the Merit League and a 4th pathway team, you know, and it was just this wonderful problem to have, because there was umpteen volunteers behind the scenes just making things really easy for me. So I think that's quite an important, you know, point to say, really.
Especially for Nic. I love Nic, but she's not the most organized person.
Yeah.
She needs that person to like do all that admin stuff.
Yeah. So at the time I was working as a director of sport. So I'd be 60 hours a week in work at 7, and then fixtures, and then literally come off a fixture, get on a tube, get to the other side of London, and just know that everything would be there, you know, done, balls out, cones out, you know. So yeah,
and
I
really
like
Nic raises a really good point about like the depth of the club, and I think that, you know, having done these chats, and it's made me reflect like how special that is. So this idea of having, you know, this developmental squad that brings people into the game who've never felt confident to play before, who didn't even know that you can't throw the ball back forward. You know, having a place for them to come and learn rugby and develop a love for it, I think is something that perhaps maybe straight teams across the country could take a leaf from the Steelers book about, something the club does really, really well. And chatting with the RFU the other day, like they had a bit of a concern about what happens after the pandemic. You know, will people no longer have that routine of Tuesday, Thursday training, Saturday game, and they might have moved on, and, you know, how do these clubs make sure that people come back to the sport? And you know, as Nic said, at the Steelers, we have a problem where we have so many people wanting to get on board sometimes that you can't have everyone. So perhaps that's something that other clubs could look to the Steelers for what you know, how they do that really well. And you know, like just reflecting back on my own experience when I first messaged the club to join, they said that they were full, and I had to wait till next season. And I just actually just rocked up to the training session and slipped myself into a team anyway. And I'm so glad I did that.
I mean, the reason why we function so well is because we have a number of control freaks like myself, so we know how to get shit done. And if we don't get it done, there's another 110 people with opinions about it.
Yeah.
Was set up at the Steelers when I was thankful to go up and visit and see a training session. It's a very robust setup, which it will have to be for such a successful team. But, you know, the way, you know, that robustness, that structure really keeps players, and the fact that there are so many people willing to play and wanting to play just demonstrates how valuable the club is. I've got a couple more questions, but I'd love to see some of our audience put some questions into the chat box or the Q&A box. So a question I wanted to pose to you all is, at the beginning of this month, Harlequins became the first professional rugby club to launch an LGBTQ+ supporters association. And I've had the opportunity to speak to lots of media over the last few weeks. And one question that was posed to me was asking, in the future, what role do inclusion groups, advocacy groups, so these type of supporters associations, IGR clubs, what role do they play in the future? Will there be a time when they're not needed due to sort of more sort of progressive societal progress? So I guess I'll start with you, Nic, do you think there's always going to be a role for these type of clubs and associations?
I do, because I think that we are, as human beings, our human nature is to be tribal. If you look at a Six Nations match when you're allowed to go out, you'll see thousands of Welsh people congregating on London Welsh Rugby Club. You know, we are tribal people. We want to feel a sense of belonging. So actually, whatever that sense of belonging is, we are going to attract to one another, that where we feel safe, and where we feel connected with people. And I don't think that's a negative thing. I think that's just something that we naturally do. And so I also think that when you go to an IGR club, you get to be your complete and whole self, and your complete and whole self amongst others who are very similar to you. So I think even if it wasn't because society was so progressive, there's an othering, there's an otherness to you being the only homosexual in a heterosexual club and bringing your husband. Sometimes you don't want to be othered. Sometimes you just want to blend in with the people that are like you. So yeah, I think in a really positive way. I think it would be like Steelers are integrated into the Essex leagues. I think you're just another kind of chain link in that, just celebrating difference. We don't have to look all the same, so I think it offers something really positive to have a fan club. I think it offers something really positive to have an inclusive club.
Great, thank you. Drew, Eammon, do you have anything to share on that question?
Nic summed it up perfect.
I think so, yeah. I kind of echo what she said. And I think, I think you'll still see more because of this continuing on in terms of spaces where people in the LGBTQ community or any other marginalized minority gravitate to spaces where they feel safe, because it's only really now in sport that those conversations are being held, and kind of having that introspection within the sport itself, regardless of what sport we might be talking to outside of just rugby, and recognizing that there is a lot of development within diversity and inclusion, and looking at that space. And even us as Steelers, I think there's an assumption that because we are a gay and bisexual, predominantly inclusive club, that we automatically have a response and answer to diversity and inclusion. But actually, we recognize that there's also growth amongst ourselves. And, I think that's just going to happen naturally, and we're always going to continue and need it.
It's like, gay bars, they'll always exist. Does it mean that I don't go to a straight bar for a drink? Absolutely. But do I love going to a gay bar and watching a drag show? Definitely. So it's like having that space,
No, completely. Thank you very much. Very well answered. So great news, everyone. We do have some questions that have now been coming through. So the first one came in, which is, what is it about rugby that you think stands apart from lots of other sports in the UK in regards to LGBTQ plus inclusion? We did touch on this a little bit, but I'd love to sort of pose it again to the group. What is it about rugby?
Well, I don't know, maybe it's a history thing. Maybe it's the fact that the Steelers was one of the first, and that they became so successful and built up this kind of community, and it spread to other clubs across the country. And the fact that rugby is such like a beloved national sport in the UK. But it's interesting, you don't really see or hear about, say, gay soccer clubs as much as you do gay rugby clubs. So I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, Drew, do you have anything you'd like to share on this one?
Yeah, I think what was it? I think was it Devin that was on the previous event, and I think he kind of said it quite well, and I agreed with him in the sense that rugby just has that general inclusion nature in an unspoken way built in, because of the fact that you have so many different body types and shapes and whatnot, and everyone has a job, and you're considered just as important as, you know, whether you're a prop versus a wing. Everyone has, and, you know, those different body shapes and experiences and expertise in whatever role that you're given is kind of accepted. So I think it's, and you're also, you know, in the match, in those 80 minutes, you're hitting each other and fighting to win. And then as soon as that last whistle blows, we're all kind of friends off the pitch and are able to socialize amongst each other, which you don't always get in other sports. There isn't that coming together at the end of a game and talking about, oh, you hit me really well, and congratulating each other in that kind of sportsmanship way. So I think that's, you know, that very much, I think, puts us like one step ahead of everyone else in that regard.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Those social connections are key. Is there something you'd like to share, Nic?
Yeah, I just would like to say that on the whole, of course, I'm a huge advocate of rugby, and I think we do have really positive things. I personally loved when the Highlanders played YMCA every time they scored against Israel Folau after his first time playing with the Highlanders. That made my absolute day. However, we can't be complacent. Some stuff come out around transgender athletes playing rugby, and I happened to tweet about that, and I had a huge amount of abuse online about it, because I said, you know, we need to have really robust science if we're going to limit players from playing. Actually, there needs to be considerable scientific evidence behind that, not just kind of doing it on a whim. And I got a huge amount of abuse about it, and you know, even this weekend we saw quite a bit of abuse about the referee, and then we saw quite a bit of abuse about Sonia McLaughlin's questioning. And I just think that, you know, we have to uphold ourselves to the true values that we're thinking about. You know, we have heard gay slurs and people not being happy about gay sports people who have represented their country closer to home than Australia. So, you know, we are not perfect, and actually we still have a battle out there, and we still have to be outspoken. We still have to kind of fight the good fight, really.
I agree with you. I think, you know, another question just come in. We touched on that sort of society, that sort of social pieces, and I guess I'll ask you, Drew, what have the Steelers been doing over the last 12 months to motivate and keep those social connections going? Are you able to talk about what's been going on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of, to what Nic said, there's always something going on behind the scenes with Matt Webb and the committee just generally, and trying to always think of how to keep those social connections. So, you know, when we could keep within the guidelines of the RFU, we were doing regular training sessions. And I think what was a big hit was kind of mixing our groups of teams and doing, you know, a form of touch games when it was allowed, touch tournament inter-club, which ended up being a great way for the club to kind of form new relationships and friendships and things, and meeting new people. And even, you know, in our current environment, having kind of fitness sessions every week to look forward to people. You know, we had a town hall just this past Friday to kind of give an update as to where the position of the club, and then there was a bit of a social post event. So there's always something happening, and very much with the Six Nations happening on, each of us kind of texting each other, you know, within our own inner, you know, groups and whatnot. So I think we understand, and I think Nic touched upon it, we're creatures of that social connection, and I think we've kind of figured out ways to keep that going, and the club is very good with keeping in contact and keeping up to date with what's happening and where we're progressing and next steps.
Then they post like a thing that I thought was powerful on Facebook, where the club said, hey, if you're willing to be an ear to listen to anyone who might be struggling, please put your phone number below. And were there like 100 phone numbers or something? It was just, yeah, I thought that was incredible.
No, it's key. It's very important. It's great to hear that there's been various things integrated to keep everyone sort of socially connected during this time. We have sort of 5 minutes left and sort of 4 questions remaining. So thank you to the audience for putting those questions through. First one, in the UK, we don't have any LGBTQ plus clubs for women yet. They do exist in Canada and other parts of Europe. Do we think there's a reason for this? And do we think it's needed? Who wants to take this one?
Nic.
Nic?
I can take it in the it's quite interesting. They do have it in football, but we don't have it in rugby. But I think we kind of have in some ways. So if you look at some of the IGR clubs, I think Coventry is one of them. They have mixed training and they have females training there. And I think there's another one up north that actually has mixed training, etc. So I think that is happening more so. However, what surprised me the most about being an ex-player moving to the men's game coaching was that actually I'd always felt like I was just part of a community and my sexuality was just another element of me. And so I felt completely accepted within the women's rugby space. It felt like a really, you know, a place where everybody was accepted. So I think there was never any need to be a kind of gay female team, but in terms of Bingham and the European competition, more and more women's teams it is a growing thing. It is a growing phenomenon.
Good, no, thank you very much for sharing that, Nic. Question from Dave: how do we make our inclusive teams not come across like we're creating walls rather than pathways into sport? Eammon or Drew, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, look, quickly, I just think drumming home the message that we're gay and inclusive rather than exclusive. And I think there's this myth out there that we touched upon before that by being this community, we're kind of being exclusive. But I just don't see it in that way. I think that, you know, for anyone who has had the experience, say, that I've had growing up, like, can you blame me for wanting to have this space where I am hanging out with people who've gone through a similar experience? You know, it's a fact that if I went into a straight rugby club, like I said before, I still would be self-editing and asking the questions about whether I come out, whether I don't. So, you know, I think I'm entitled to have that kind of space. And you know, we welcome straight players to come in and join us. We play against straight teams. And
I think that's really important. That every single week going out to the Essex Leagues, meeting people realizing that you're just another human being who plays rugby, making those connections come through.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, in the 12 years that I've been with the club and playing a lot of the same teams in Essex, you know, it's been quite consistent over the years with playing with them, and at the end, you know, as I said before, coming together and drinking and kind of having a chat, you always get the message from a good majority of the clubs and guys that, you know, they really enjoy and look forward to playing against us, because not only are we great competitors on the pitch, but actually we're quite enjoyable to hang out with. And I think there's a lot more of just feeling relief that we can get on with each other and have a good chat and banter and laugh and whatnot. So, you know, it's for them, it's also educational in the sense of probably not being exposed as easily compared to maybe living in the city of London and having such a large community at your doorstep. But you know, they're on that journey with us and happy to learn and continue to learn, which is great. Took us a lot of time to get there, but we're getting there.
Exactly. It's about having that dialogue and explaining that it is naturally inclusive and not exclusive, as you said, Eammon. Before we move on to our last question, we've had a question through from Anthony to you, Eammon, about when the film...
Father-in-law.
There might be a connection. When's the film going to be released to the general public?
So look, we're in negotiations right now for that to happen, and I can't say anything, but, you know, hopefully we'll have some really exciting news soon. But, you know, just thrilled that it's out there through the Glasgow Film Festival. And yeah, you know, just thank you for Harlequins for putting this event on, and I know that people got to see the link through signing up to hear this. So you know, please send me a message, let me know what you thought about the film, because, you know, I'm far away and feel quite disconnected from it all. So when I get a message, it makes my day. And yeah, I just hope that my film is one brick in the pathway towards, you know, the world we all want to be living in. So yeah, it's been a very wonderful journey making this and something that started off as a bit of a dream, a tiny idea, and I never would have imagined what it turned into. So, you know, sometimes some things are meant to be. So I feel like this is one of those things.
I'm delighted to hear about the success it's had, Eammon. Lastly, because I would like to make sure everyone's questions are answered, thank you, Lauren. What could football learn from rugby in creating inclusive nature for the LGBTQ+ community? As succinctly as we can from each of the panelists, what can football do? Nic?
I think celebrate the teams that you have, Stonewall FC, the teams that are already out there, get them in with big clubs, get them meeting fans. You know, I think the more advocacy that we do, where we're much more highly visible, I think that brings about that feeling that we have more in common, you know, than we have differences.
Great, thank you. Drew?
Yeah, the same. I think, you know, having a connection with a big club, almost as what Harlequins is doing, whether it be Chelsea, West Ham, whoever it might be, you know, and being that advocate, having someone on your side and kind of having that space and speaking not for you, but with you, and kind of being that advocate will go a long way in creating kind of that inclusive nature.
Yeah, well said. And lastly, last words from you, Eammon?
Well, I would just say, you know, if you're wanting to start a club, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help. And that's one thing the IGR community in the UK and around the world is very good at, like mentoring each other. So when there's a new club starting up, you'll get people from clubs like the Steelers and the Manchester Village Spartans give their time and offer advice and share the lessons learned. So, you know, I think a lot of the lessons would apply no matter what sport. So reach out and ask for help.
Fantastic, thank you all. So thank you very much to the audience for all those questions that came through there. Apologies, we've gone a little bit over 8 o'clock, but such stimulating discussion, didn't want to stop it. Just from my end, thank you so much to Eammon, Drew and Nic for giving up your time on a Sunday evening. Fantastic to have you here for a really impactful discussion. So thank you so much. And also just a few thank yous as well. Thank you to Mark Leckie from the foundation for helping us make this, sort of facilitate this tonight. Thank you very much to Tim from the foundation, who did all the work in sort of organizing this from the Zoom perspective and managing all the sign-ups. And lastly, just a shout out to Matt Webb at the Steelers for all the work that he does and sort of making the Steelers so successful and continue to be, but equally all the work he's doing at the RFU and sort of driving that conversation forward. So I think that's
Harlequins, because you guys are trailblazers in this space. You know, it's giving us that visibility and allyship that is so important.
I think Nic has gone. So, and as you're welcome, Eammon. And as I said, it's so fantastic that we have the platform to do it, and we're delighted to do it as well. So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Have a good one.